Hello there, Professor Moore and my lovely classmates of U.S. History class. So I did my paper on Civil War ironclad ships, in particular the CSS Virginia and the USS Monitor. So at the beginning of the Civil War, as we discussed in lecture, this Confederacy didn't really have an established government, an army or navy or anything. So Secretary of the Navy Stephen Mallory was kind of in a bind there, so he looked abroad to countries like England and France to purchase ships and contract shipbuilders. But also he looked to the future of naval warfare and started with the USS Merrimac, which was a steam frigate that was burned by the Union when the Confederacy started taking over Norfolk, Virginia. And they converted this wooden ship into this iron warship because the Confederacy needed a ship that could break through the Union blockade, as we discussed in lecture as well, that was surrounding the South at that time. So they renamed this ship the CSS Virginia, and it was very strong and powerful and sturdy, but its one problem was it was so heavy that it was very slow to turn, and it was very bulky, slow moving, and as one Confederate officer on board the ship said, that it was almost like Noah's Ark turning. It would take 30 to 40 minutes to turn the ship to the other side. Well, when the Union heard about the Confederacy building this ship, they decided, hey, we're going to build an ironclad ship of our own, which became the USS Monitor. And they took a kind of a different building tactic. Instead of having this big bulky ship, theirs was very small, only had 2 guns instead of the mini guns that the Confederate ship had. And its advantage was it had a rotating turret, so it might not have had as many guns, but it could move faster and fire from all different angles while the Confederate ship was still trying to turn around. So the first skirmish that the Virginia faced was on March 8th of 1862, and it was against 5 Union ships: the USS Minnesota, the USS Congress, the USS Roanoke, and the USS Cumberland, and the USS St. Lawrence. And the ships weren't expecting this at all, so the ironclad ship kind of took them by surprise. And when the battle started, the wooden ships were firing on this ironclad ship, but they realized that their cannonballs were basically just deflecting off of it, so that would be very horrifying to the opponents there. And basically at the end of the battle, 2 of the Union ships were sunk, and another one was damaged, and over 200 sailors were killed. So the next morning, the Confederacy was thinking, oh, we're going to do the same thing again and wreak havoc on the Union. Well, they met their match with the USS Monitor, which had been traveling towards the battle, which the crew of the Virginia were expecting a ironclad by the Union, but they weren't expecting it to look like it did. They were expecting it to look more like their big bulky ship. So they originally thought that the USS Monitor was a buoy. And basically the battle was a stalemate. Both of them were firing, and their cannonballs were deflecting off of each other. So eventually the Virginia got tired of this and tried to attack the USS Minnesota, which was a wooden ship nearby, and the Monitor used its speed and was able to catch up and kind of stop the attack, and eventually both ships just were like, hey, we're not getting anywhere, so we're just going to go our separate ways. So throughout the rest of the war, these 2 ships never faced each other again in a battle, and they were actually destroyed by their own men a year later. The Virginia was unseaworthy, and when they had to evacuate Norfolk from the north, they just destroyed it. And the north, due to bad weather, had to sink their ship off of Cape Hatteras. And although this was just a short-lived battle, it wasn't, that significant loss-wise. It sparked a whole new revolution where the wooden ships were a thing of the past, and it started this new era of naval warfare where we had iron ships, and eventually we had battleships, and it just kept going from there. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, I purposely sat in front of this Civil War warship here behind me. Although it's not an ironclad, I didn't have a picture of an ironclad, so yeah, pretty cool. Anyways, I think I've covered most of the points, so thank you for listening.